Welcome back to season two of Strategic Advice. I'm your host, Phil Hahn. I'm a professor at the Naval War College, and this year I'm on sabbatical at beautiful Dartmouth College, where I'm a visiting scholar. And this year's Strategic Advice is aimed at a new assistant tenure track faculty who have landed that elusive job and now face the daunting task of actually teaching. And before we go further, I want to say a disclaimer that the views expressed today are our own and not from our own institutions. And I'm joined with Jennifer Erickson, who is an associate professor at Boston College. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks, Phil. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Well, I'm really excited to hear about what advice you have. And our first of two topics with you today is undergraduate lecture courses. So I know Boston College has a lot of undergraduate lecture courses, and you've been teaching there for a while. So let me just hand it over to you to give us a little bit of background on how you've come to teach lecture courses, and then we'll dive into the advice you have for a brand new professor.
Yeah, so Boston College does have a lot of lecture courses, but I think different kinds of institutions have lecture courses that look a little different too. So I think this will sort of depend on the kind of institution you're teaching at in many ways. I teach one undergraduate lecture course with teaching assistants and discussion sections, and one that doesn't. And so I have experimented with sort of different ways of teaching undergraduate lecture courses. I had really fabulous teaching mentors when I was an undergraduate at a liberal arts college and in graduate school, but I had never lectured before I started this job. So this was really something I was learning from scratch. And I generally don't consider myself a natural public speaker. So I had to learn what I was doing kind of on the job. And I think it's really useful to talk about some of the strategies we might use to make that go a little more smoothly.
Okay, well, great. Well, let's just get right into it then. So what strategies have you found most useful?
So I have a few pieces of advice. I think it's going to boil down to like 5. So I want to
Okay.
start with the first one. That is, before you start the job, I think it's really useful to talk to your new faculty colleagues about department teaching norms, reading loads, exam styles and frequency, paper writing, and in-class engagement. When I started at Boston College, I assumed that students here took 4 classes at once because that was sort of the norm at the other institutions I had taught at. I find out a few weeks into the semester that it's actually 5 classes at once. And so the way I had sort of geared the class and the expectations that I had of students who were just sort of taking an elective lecture course didn't really fit with what they were able to do over the course of the semester. And BC thinks about itself as a liberal arts school where teaching matters to the faculty in the department, to the university. And so the students also have very different expectations about what lectures should deliver and what lectures should be. They didn't want somebody just talking at them the whole time. They wanted more engagement in the classroom. So of course you have to be efficient with your time and resources and effective about your course material, but you have to adapt somewhat to the institution and sort of the expectations of the course load for the students and what they're looking for in the classroom too. And I think if I had known a little bit more about what BC looked like in the classroom and for teaching, I think the initial teaching and lecture planning would have gone a little more smoothly than it actually did.
Oh, great. So know your environment and
Know your
don't make
environment.
assumptions about what the students,
Correct.
that's a
Yeah.
great about the amount of time they have available. So it's a good comment.
Yeah.
Okay,
My
next.
My second point is that you also really have to find the lecture style that works for you. I don't have personally a big voice or a big physical presence. I also, when I TA'd for one professor who had a German accent and he would do sort of Schwarzenegger quotes to talk about power and international politics. I can't adopt those strategies with my own teaching. I don't have theater training to do impressions. There's somebody in our history department who can do a mean Kissinger, apparently. I can't do any of this stuff. I had to find the right style that fits for me. I couldn't really mimic what other people were doing, or it would sort of seem awkward or weird. Jokes that work for one professor don't work for another professor. Your sense of humor, your stories that you tell, the way that you illustrate points, that should come a little more organically from how you understand international politics examples that sort of resonate with you. I think these style will evolve over time, but you don't feel like you have to mimic people that you've seen be really great lecturers before you, because what they do might just not translate onto your own style. So that's my second point. Find the lecture style that works for you.
So be yourself.
Be
Got
yourself. Well, within reason, right?
it.
So, my third point is that timing is really tricky with lecturing. And this is, I think, one of the biggest adaptations that I had to learn and make over the process of starting to lecture. I really had no idea how tricky it would be. In my first few weeks of lectures, I had vastly less material planned for that 75-minute lecture slot than I needed to fill that 75-minute lecture slot. And thankfully, I'd prepped ahead of time so I could sort of pull on material that I had prepared ahead. But it's really challenging to sort of find that right balance of giving enough information, not too much information, conveying it at a speed that's accessible for students and not too quickly and not too slowly. And so striking that balance and figuring out what that is, that does take a little bit of time. I don't think that you can overwhelm students with information. I had actually underprepared because I thought it would take more time to talk through the material that I was sharing with them. It also gets tricky when you know a lot about the topic you're talking about. You tend to kind of want to overfill how much you're going to tell them about, and sometimes you got to dial it back. So over time, this can vary across your lectures. To me, I think it's useful to engage in a couple of strategies to maybe make this a little bit less tricky. One is that I like to intersperse discussions into the lecture. Sometimes they're short discussions. I'll ask them about a reading, or I'll ask them to comment on something that I'm talking about, or just share what they understand a concept to mean. I might ask them about the readings themselves. I might ask them if they have questions about what I've just shown them. But stopping and asking can help them calibrate a little bit to the information that you're giving. And spend a little time making sure they're keeping up with you. I also, in my 75-minute classes, prep for about 60 minutes of lecture, and I leave the last 15 minutes for discussions. Sometimes I'll do them as small group discussions. I'll give them set discussion questions on the PowerPoint, but it gives you a little buffer to play with. If you go a little bit long or you go a little bit short, you can sort of end with that student-led discussion and get you a little bit more time in. So if you're not precise on your timing, it's okay. I have colleagues who will practice their lectures in advance. I personally don't really have time for that. I think it would be great if I did. I do make lecture notes, but practicing is not something I really feel is feasible, especially in an early teaching career that you're just trying to juggle so much and keep up with things. But I do think there's ways to sort of mitigate the timing pressure. And then over time, you'll just get a better sense of how you move through material and how long that will take. But that takes a little bit of so ways to play around with it in the short term can help also. Okay, so my fourth point is a little bit related to the third, and that is I'm a big fan of lecture notes, and we shouldn't be afraid of lecture notes as a tool for helping us prepare for courses. I like to prepare in advance. I like to review my material before I go into my lecture so that it's fresh in my head. And so even when I'm walking in with notes, I want it to feel like a natural conversation and not just like I'm reading something and it's stilted, but it does help me keep on track with time and material. It makes sure that I don't go kind of off on tangents or try to fill in too much detail where I don't really need it. And so I think some people are really proud of being able to go into a lecture and just talk. I am not one of those people, and I think you have to figure out what style works for you again. But for me, I think we shouldn't be afraid of lecture notes as a way to help us with our timing and help us make sure that our sort of material moves smoothly through the semester, can connect to themes across the semesters and so on. Every great lecturer I've known, honestly, has done this, has come in with lecture notes. And so some people can skip them, but I don't think we should see it as a badge of honor to not use them. We should use them and embrace them if it's useful to us. The last point I want to make is about conveying information to students effectively. I think this is one of the most important things we do with lectures, but because we're talking at students for a long time, this can be hard to listen to for the students over time. I know it's hard for me to sit in talks and listen to people without sort of visual and audio cues about what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. So I think it's really important, just like we do signposting in our writing, to do the same sorts of things as we give lectures. So in an individual lecture, I will start the lecture by reviewing briefly what we talked about last time. I'll ask for student engagement on that. I will tell them what's really important to look for ahead in the lecture. And so they can keep their eye out for those things. And then at the end of lecture, I'll say, okay, here's what's ahead next time. Here's what to look for in the reading. So I sort of give the lecture a structure that they can sort of pay attention to. And then as I'm going through material, I try to use the slides for the visual learners and use what I'm saying for the more audio learners to really highlight the material that I think is important. So I might bold and put up a big definition for a concept like the security dilemma that I think is important. I'll break it down in my speaking, but I'll also try to highlight it on the slides. I don't want lots of text on the slides, but I want them to see the stuff I think is really important. Similarly, at the beginning of the semester, I'll give them sort of an arc for the semester as a whole, and I'll talk to them about the material I think they should be taking from lectures as they're studying for exams and thinking about how to process all of the concepts, theory, and history that I'm putting in front of them. How do they sort through material to say, this is important and I should study this? And here's material that it's interesting, but it's not crucial that I understand this for an exam. I tell them they shouldn't be court reporters in the classroom, that they should really pay attention to what I'm saying and how I'm showing the material and star things and circle things in their notes so that later they're not overwhelmed by information. And I want my lectures to help them take more effective notes and understand more efficiently what I'm trying to convey to them and sort through the sort of interesting information with the, I'm going to test you on this kind of information. So I really want them to learn all at once sort of how to take good notes and feel that the lecture is worth their time, but not feel frustrated or lost in all the material that I'm presenting. Because we really do, when we teach, give them so much information that a person who's new to the topic might be completely overwhelmed by it if we don't sort of offer them guidance for how to listen, how to take notes, and how to understand the material they're being presented with. And I think doing that makes lecturing much more effective, but it also means that you're keeping the students along with you and you have sort of their goodwill as you're going along with it. So I think those are my 5 points.
Well, that's good. So that's great. So we got a couple more minutes. And so
Great.
I had two different types of questions. One was more of like the structure of your lecture. So over the course of a course or over a course, how do you think about your lectures? How many do you normally have to put together? How are they related to your syllabus? How do you think about those more holistically?
That's a great question. I think this is easier to answer for an intro to international relations kind of class, which I teach every spring. I sort of set that up in sections, and I'm a follow the syllabus kind of person. I like to plan, and I like students to kind of know what's ahead. And so with an intro to international relations, I sort of set it up as, I'm going to teach you theories for the first, month of class, and we're going to have lectures on all the different theories. And then the rest of the semester, we're going to apply those theories to historical and contemporary cases in security, political economy, and global governance. So there's an application sort of process. When I teach elective lecture courses, it's a little bit more flexible, but I do tend to start the course with sort of conceptual frameworks and conceptual building blocks, and then do sort of case studies and applications once we have those kind of big analytical concepts underway. I teach 2 lectures a week per class for about 15 or 16 weeks, depending on the semester. So every week I'm prepping 2 75-minute lectures for a class. That can take a fair bit of time. In my other video, you'll see me talk about efficient teaching techniques, so I'll take that on a little bit. But I think that if you think about the structure of the syllabus and how the course material builds on itself, you can mimic that in your lectures too. And you want students to see the sort of different themes and threads that you're pulling through the semester over time. So in my global governance class that I'm teaching right now, we talk about why international cooperation is so difficult and so hard to achieve. And we talk about kind of the theoretical reasons for that. And then we test that out on kind of contemporary policy issues, like international conflict, arms control, global health, all sorts of things where students can relate those concepts more concretely. And I think that helps them a lot too.
Okay, well, great. Well, I'm going to save the other question to our next video. We've reached 15 minutes. Can you
Excellent.
believe how quickly the time has flown by? Jennifer, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
your time today on strategic advice. All right, see you.